I looked at my bird feeder that Tuesday morning, a modest little thing hanging from my oak tree, frequented by cheerful chickadees and the occasional cardinal, and I had no idea that within 6 hours it would become the catalyst for what I can only describe as the great Avian uprising of Maple Grove Estates. The doorbell rang at precisely 2:47 p.m. I know this because I was in the middle of a very important conference call about quarterly projections, and my watch beeped the exact moment I heard that soul-crushing ding-dong. Standing on my porch was Karen Fitzgerald, HOA President, guardian of property values, and part-time destroyer of joy. She wore her signature white capris, a visor despite the overcast sky, and an expression that suggested she'd just discovered I was running an underground cockfighting ring. "Kevin," she didn't wait for pleasantries. "We need to discuss your bird feeder situation." I blinked. "My bird feeder situation?" "It's attracting pests," she gestured vaguely toward my front yard, as if bears were currently holding a rave on my lawn. I looked at the feeder. A sparrow was enjoying some seeds. The sparrow looked back at me. We shared a moment of confusion. "That's literally a bird," I said. "The feeder is for birds. It's functioning as intended." Karen produced a clipboard from thin air. I swear she has a magical pocket dimension where she stores grievances and laminated HOA bylaws. Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Maple Grove Estates Community Standards states that residents shall not maintain any structure or installation that attracts nuisance wildlife or creates unsanitary conditions. "Karen, it's a bird feeder. I've received complaints." "From who?" "Multiple residents. Name one." She clutched her clipboard tighter. "That's confidential. You're the only person who can see my front yard from their house." "This isn't personal, Kevin. This is about maintaining our community standards." "The bird seed attracts squirrels. The squirrels attract snakes. The snakes attract eagles, dragons, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?" Her eye twitched. "You have 48 hours to remove it, or you'll be fined $50 per day until compliance is achieved." She turned on her pristine white sneakers and marched back to her house, the one with the perfectly geometric hedges and the doormat that probably says, "Please remove shoes, soul, and will to live." I stood there, coffee in hand, watching a blue jay land on my feeder. The audacity of this creature coming to my yard and eating food I specifically provided for it. The chaos. The mayhem. Truly, I was running a criminal enterprise. Here's what you need to understand about HOA disputes. They're never really about what they're about. Karen didn't care about my bird feeder. She cared that I'd voted against her proposal to ban basketball hoops in driveways. She cared that I'd laughed, perhaps too loudly, when she suggested our community needed a unified mailbox aesthetic. She cared that I'd publicly questioned why the HOA needed a $40,000 budget for community beautification, when all we got was 3 benches and some allegedly drought-resistant plants that died within a month. She cared that I existed in a state of not being sufficiently terrified of her authority. But I digress. That evening, I sat in my living room and pondered my options. I could remove the bird feeder like a reasonable person and go about my life. Or, and hear me out, I could become the problem she couldn't solve. I could become the bird feeder equivalent of nuclear escalation. I could turn this petty grievance into such a spectacular display of malicious compliance that generations of HOA presidents would tell stories about it in hushed, terrified whispers. I started researching. By midnight, I had learned several fascinating things. First, the HOA bylaws said nothing about aviaries. Second, there's a thriving, Market for backyard bird sanctuaries. Third, and most importantly, the technical definition of bird feeder and aviary are legally distinct concepts, and I was about to exploit that loophole like it was a tax haven in the Cayman Islands. Fourth, peacocks are surprisingly affordable and make sounds that can be heard from several houses away. Fifth, I was definitely going to need therapy after this, but it would be worth it. Wednesday morning, I called every contractor within a 50-mile radius. Most of them laughed when I explained what I wanted. One hung up on me. Another thought I was pranking him. But then, I found Randy, owner of Randy's Custom Outdoor Solutions, a man who'd clearly been waiting his entire career for someone to ask him to build something completely absurd. "So let me get this straight," Randy said over the phone, barely containing his glee. "You want me to build an aviary? In your front yard? Visible from the street?" "Correct. And you want it big. 15 feet tall, 20 feet wide. I want it to be the first thing anyone sees when they drive down our street. I want it to appear on Google Earth. I want aliens to spot it from space and say, 'What's happening down there?' Brother, I love everything about this. When do we start?" "Today. My man. This is why I got into this business. Not to build decks for people named Chad. To build monuments to spite. I'm in. We're doing this." Randy and his crew arrived at 3 p.m. with lumber, chicken wire, posts, and the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who just won the lottery. They unloaded materials like they were preparing for battle, which, in a way, they were. Karen emerged from her house approximately 7 minutes later, moving at a speed that suggested she'd somehow sensed a disturbance in the force. She had that look, the one that says someone's about to have a very bad day, and she's convinced it won't be her. "What is this?" she demanded, staring at Randy's truck. "Home improvement," I said cheerfully. "Just making some upgrades to the property." "What kind of upgrades?" "A decorative outdoor structure for my yard, which I own, with my own money, to do with as I please within the bounds of local, state, and federal law." Her eyes narrowed. "Kevin, if you're doing this to spite me..." "Karen, I'm wounded. Truly. I'm simply a man who loves birds. You pointed out quite correctly that my bird feeder was problematic. So I'm solving the problem. No more bird feeder. Just a beautiful, spacious, legally distinct bird sanctuary." "What are you building?" "You'll see. It's going to be magnificent." For the next 3 days, Randy and his crew worked with the dedication of artisans crafting a Renaissance cathedral. The structure rose from my lawn like a monument to suburban pettiness. 16-foot posts sunk deep into concrete, heavy-gauge wire mesh that could probably contain small dinosaurs. A proper roof with weather-resistant shingles that matched my house. Multiple entry points with one-way bird doors that Randy assured me were state-of-the-art in aviary access technology. Interior perches at varying heights to accommodate different species. A small pond feature with a recirculating pump. Decorative rocks arranged in a Zen garden pattern, because why not? Native plants to provide natural cover and foraging opportunities. It was glorious. It was excessive. It was exactly what Karen deserved. The neighborhood watched with growing horror and fascination. My next-door neighbor, Phil, came over on day 2, beer in hand, just staring at the construction. "Kevin, buddy," he said slowly, that's really something." "Thanks, Phil." "Karen looks like she's about to have an aneurysm." "I know. I've been taking pictures for documentation purposes." "You're insane." "Thank you. Want to help me name the peacocks?" "You're getting peacocks?" "3 of them." Phil took a long drink of his beer. "I'm Team Sion. Kevin, just so you know, whatever happens, I'm on your side." On day 3, Randy installed decorative lighting, solar-powered LEDs that would illuminate the aviary at night. "For safety," he said with a wink. "And also because it'll look like a nightclub for birds, which is hilarious." The Johnsons came by with their kids, who pressed their faces against the fence to watch the construction. 7-year-old Emma asked if she could come see the birds when they arrived. Her mother looked mortified and apologetic. "Emma, we can't impose on Mr. Kevin. Emma can visit any time," I interrupted. "In fact, I'm thinking of doing educational tours once everything's set up. Community outreach. Karen loves community outreach." Mrs. Johnson tried not to laugh. She failed. By Friday evening, the aviary was complete. It dominated my front yard like a statement piece in a minimalist art gallery. Except instead of making you contemplate existence, it made you contemplate what happens when you push a reasonable man too far over a bird feeder. The structure was professionally built, aesthetically pleasing, and absolutely, undeniably impossible to ignore. Randy stood back, hands on hips, surveying his work with the pride of a father watching his child graduate valedictorian. "Kevin, I've built hundreds of projects in my career. Pool houses, gazebos, custom patios. This is my masterpiece. This is what I'll be remembered for." "It's perfect, Randy." "I know. I took pictures. This is going on my website under Specialty Projects. I'm calling it the Karen Memorial Aviary." "You're a poet." Now came phase 2, the birds. I contacted wildlife rehabilitation centers, bird sanctuaries, and exotic bird breeders across 3 states. I explained my situation to them, which basically amounted to, I need to house a ridiculous number of birds in a suburban aviary for reasons that are definitely about nature conservation and definitely not about devastating my HOA President's will to live. Most places were intrigued. One rehabilitator named Sandra actually cackled when I told her the backstory. "So you're telling me," she said between laughs, "that you built a giant aviary to spite your HOA President?" "No, Sandra. I built a giant aviary because I care deeply about providing sanctuary to birds who need homes. The spite is merely a pleasant side effect, a happy coincidence, a delightful bonus feature." "You're diabolical. I love it. I've got 6 mourning doves that just finished rehab and need a good home. They're sweet, but they coo constantly. Like, constantly, from dawn until dusk. It's like having a house full of people who only speak in soft, repetitive questions." "Perfect. I'll take them. You're my hero." I also contacted local bird clubs, posted on exotic pet forums, and put up flyers at feed stores. The response was overwhelming. Apparently, there are a lot of birds in need of homes, and people were thrilled to find someone with a legitimate, well-built sanctuary. By Sunday, I had commitments for 47 birds. Doves, finches, sparrows, a few cockatiels that someone's grandmother could no longer care for, 2 parakeets whose owner was moving overseas, a handful of canaries from a breeder who was retiring, and, the pièce de résistance, 3 peacocks from a farm that was downsizing. "The peacocks might be loud," the farmer warned me over the phone. "How loud are we talking?" "Very, extremely, ear-splittingly, like if a car alarm and a screaming toddler had a baby, and that baby was also somehow a train horn." "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. When can you deliver them?" "I like your energy. Monday morning work for you?" "Monday morning is perfect." That weekend, I prepared. I bought bird food in bulk, enough to feed a small army of feathered creatures for months. I installed water dispensers, feeding stations, and bathing areas. I added more perches, nesting boxes, and hiding spots. I set up a small shed next to the aviary to store supplies and equipment. I even created a logbook to track bird health, behavior, and feeding schedules, because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it properly. Phil came over Sunday afternoon and found me arranging rocks in the aviary's pond. "You know," he said, "most people who get into feuds with their HOA just ignore the rules and pay the fines." "I'm not most people, Phil." "Clearly. Have you seen Karen's house? She's been pacing in front of her window all weekend. Pretty sure she hasn't slept." Good. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a marching band. Randy showed up at 7 a.m. to install the final touch, a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Kevin's Bird Sanctuary, Est 2024, dedicated to the preservation of avian life and the mockery of unreasonable authority," in letters large enough to read from the street. The second part was in smaller text, but still legible. Then the birds began arriving. Sandra brought the mourning doves first, transporting them in careful crates lined with soft fabric. As soon as we released them into the aviary, they immediately began cooing, a sound like someone asking, "Who?" over and over in the gentlest possible way. "They're perfect," I told Sandra. "They're going to drive you insane, but yes, they're perfect." Throughout the morning, more birds arrived. Another rehabilitator delivered a dozen finches that immediately began chirping in what I can only describe as excited conversation. The cockatiels came in a minivan driven by a sweet, elderly woman named Agnes, who blessed me repeatedly for providing refuge to God's creatures, and told me I had kind eyes and a generous soul. I didn't have the heart to tell her this was fueled by spite and the systematic deconstruction of HOA tyranny. Let her believe I was a good person. Someone should. The parakeets arrived in matching travel cages. Apparently their previous owner had spoiled them rotten as they immediately began squawking opinions about their new accommodations. The canaries, in contrast, started singing almost instantly, filling the air with elaborate melodies. And then came the peacocks. Jake, the farmer, arrived at 11 a.m. in a trailer designed for livestock, backing carefully into my driveway while neighbors gathered on the street like they were witnessing either a miracle or a slow-motion disaster. Some had cameras out. Mrs. Henderson brought lawn chairs. "You sure about this?" Jake asked as we prepared to unload the peacocks. "These boys are characters. The big one's name is Gerald. He's opinionated." "Jake, I've never been more sure about anything in my life." We opened the trailer, and Gerald emerged like a king surveying his new kingdom. His tail feathers were magnificent, easily 5 feet long, covered in iridescent eye spots that caught the morning light. Behind him came the other 2 males, slightly smaller but equally impressive. The peacocks strutted into their new home with the confidence of celebrities checking into a 5-star resort. Gerald immediately began displaying his tail feathers, spreading them in a magnificent fan that made several onlookers gasp. He looked directly at Karen's house and let out his first call. "Ah!" Gerald announced to the neighborhood, his voice carrying across yards like an air raid siren mixed with a dying cat. Karen's scream from inside her house was nearly as loud. She burst out her front door like someone had set her living room on fire, marched across both our lawns, directly through her precious flower bed, I noted with satisfaction, and stood before the aviary with an expression that suggested she was experiencing every stage of grief simultaneously, while also possibly having a stroke. "What?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet and shaking with barely controlled rage. "Is that?" "That, Karen, is a bird sanctuary, a haven for our feathered friends, a testament to my commitment to wildlife conservation and environmental stewardship." "Those are peacocks." "3 of them, yes. Gerald, Herbert and Reginald. Beautiful creatures. Did you know the male's tail feathers can have over 200 individual eye-like patterns? Each feather is unique, like a fingerprint. Nature is amazing. You can't have peacocks in a residential neighborhood. Actually, I can. I checked, extensively. I spent several hours on the phone with the township, the county, and even called the State Department of Agriculture just to be thorough. There's no ordinance against peacocks in our township. In fact, they're considered domestic fowl, like chickens. And before you ask, chickens are also allowed, though I haven't gotten any yet. Yet being the operative word. Her face progressed through several shades of red I didn't know existed in nature. She looked like a thermometer about to explode. This is deliberately a contribution to local wildlife preservation? Thank you. I'm quite proud of it. The structure is professionally built, meets all safety codes, and provides excellent habitat for birds in need. I'm actually considering applying for nonprofit status. Tax benefits, you know. The HOA will hear about this. Karen, you are the HOA. You're the president, secretary, and apparently the entire board, since the other positions are mysteriously always under review. So yes, I imagine the HOA will hear about it very quickly. Gerald chose that exact moment to let out another call, a sound best described as if someone was torturing a car alarm while simultaneously strangling a peacock-shaped air horn. "Ah," Gerald announced, his voice echoing off houses. Several car alarms actually went off in sympathy. Karen stood there, trembling with rage, her clipboard clutched so tight I thought she might snap it in half. Her perfectly styled hair had come slightly loose. Her visor sat crooked. For the first time since I'd moved to Maple Grove Estates, Karen Fitzgerald looked genuinely defeated. "This isn't over!" she hissed, turned and stormed back to her house. I could hear her slamming doors from across the lawn. All her doors. She must have gone through the house, slamming every single one. Phil appeared at my elbow, munching popcorn. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. I'm moved. I might cry. The Aviary or Karen's meltdown? Both, equally. I recorded it. Want me to send you the video? Please. The rest of Monday was a symphony of bird sounds. The mourning doves cooed their philosophical questions. The finches chirped cheerfully about finch things. The parakeets squawked commentary. The canaries sang elaborate songs. And every 30 minutes or so, Gerald would announce his presence to the world with a scream that could wake the dead and probably violated several Geneva Conventions. It was perfect. The next morning, I received an official notice from the Maple Grove Estates HOA, delivered by certified mail and signed by Karen in handwriting so aggressive it nearly tore through the paper. She'd used so much force that I could feel the indentation on the back of the page. Emergency notice of violation. Unapproved structure. Excessive noise disturbance. Aesthetic disruption. Potential property value impact. Unauthorized wildlife maintenance. Creation of public nuisance. Violation of community quiet hours. Disturbance of peace and willful disregard for community standards. Mandatory removal required within 72 hours. Emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Thursday, 7 p.m. Mandatory attendance for violating party. I texted Phil. She's calling an emergency meeting about my birds. Phil. I know. I got the notice too. All residents did. She marked it urgent in red letters. I'm bringing popcorn and possibly champagne. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a glorious cacophony of bird sounds. The finches chirped cheerfully at dawn. The doves cooed throughout the day. The parakeets offered running commentary on neighborhood activities. The canaries sang entire operatic movements, and Gerald and his peacock companions screamed like they were auditioning for a death metal band with a specialty in alarm sounds. My other neighbors had increasingly complex reactions. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down called it delightfully eccentric and brought her grandchildren over daily. She'd set up a little schedule. 10 a.m. birdwatching became a regular event. The Johnsons were less enthusiastic about the noise, though Mr. Johnson admitted that watching the peacocks strut around was weirdly entertaining, like nature's comedy show. Their kids were obsessed, constantly asking to visit. Karen's friend Deborah, the woman who once called the cops because my grass was half an inch too tall, measured it with a ruler and submitted photographic evidence, glared at me every time she drove past. She'd slow her car to a crawl, stare at the aviary with undisguised hatred, then speed off like she was fleeing a crime scene. Bob, the guy with the Harley, gave me a thumbs up every morning. "Respect," he said. "Pure respect. This is art." Thursday evening arrived. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a bland room that smelled like old coffee, broken dreams, and the faint despair of people forced to attend meetings about fence colors. About 30 residents attended, which was 27 more than usual. Word of the Great Bird incident had spread through Maple Grove Estates like wildfire. People were invested. They'd chosen sides. Someone had apparently started a betting pool on the outcome. Karen stood at the front, her presentation clearly prepared with the care and fury of a prosecutor at a murder trial. She had a PowerPoint with 73 slides. She'd printed handouts, in color, double-sided, with tabs. She had circled passages in the HOA bylaws with red marker, highlighted others in yellow, and added angry margin notes. There were charts, graphs, a timeline of events that made my bird feeder look like the beginning of suburban collapse. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice tight enough to cut glass. "We're here to address a serious violation that threatens our community's standards, property values, and quality of life. Kevin's bird situation." She spat the word bird like it was a curse. She clicked to her first slide, which showed a picture of my aviary photographed from an angle that made it look even more dramatic. She'd somehow captured it during sunset, so it loomed against the sky like a prison, or possibly a cathedral. "This structure," she continued, advancing through slides of the aviary from multiple angles, "was constructed without HOA approval. It violates our aesthetic guidelines, creates excessive noise pollution, attracts attention from outside the community, and sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow this, what's next? Goat farms? Llama ranches? Zebra sanctuaries? Where does it end?" Someone in the back muttered, "Llamas would be cool, actually." Another voice added, "I've always wanted goats." Karen's eye twitched. She clicked to her next slide, a decibel reading chart. Furthermore, the noise from these birds, particularly the peacocks, constitutes a severe nuisance. I've taken the liberty of measuring sound levels at various times throughout the day. At peak times, the peacock calls reach 115 decibels, equivalent to a rock concert or chainsaw. "Also equivalent to your voice right now," someone coughed from the middle rows. Karen pretended not to hear this. She clicked through more slides. Photos of the aviary from different times of day, charts showing projected property value decline, quotes from random real estate websites about undesirable neighborhood features, and a truly unhinged diagram suggesting that the presence of peacocks would somehow create a cascade effect, leading to full suburban collapse. "Residents deserve peace in their own homes," she continued, her voice rising. "They deserve to enjoy their properties without disruption. They deserve to live in a community that maintains standards. My own quality of life has been severely impacted. I can't sleep. I can't concentrate. I can't enjoy my morning coffee without being assaulted by bird screams. "Have you tried earplugs?" Phil called out. "This isn't funny," Karen snapped. "It's a little funny," Phil stage whispered. Karen took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain composure. She clicked to her final slide. Proposed resolution: immediate removal of structure and relocation of all birds within 7 days. Failure to comply results in a lien against the property and potential legal action. All in favor, we vote tonight. She looked directly at me with an expression of absolute certainty. She thought she'd won. She'd assembled evidence, made charts, printed handouts. Surely that was enough. "Kevin, would you like to respond?" I stood up slowly, holding my own folder, significantly less organized than hers, held together with a single paperclip. But I'd made my peace with that. Sometimes the best counter to excessive preparation is casual confidence. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate your passionate presentation. However, I'd like to address several points. First, regarding HOA approval for structures." I pulled out my own printed copy of the bylaws, conveniently bookmarked. Section 12 of our bylaws specifies that approval is required for permanent structures that materially alter the property footprint. My aviary, while impressive, is technically a temporary structure. It's assembled with posts that could be removed, wire that could be dismantled, and components that could be relocated. I chose not to dismantle it because the birds are happy and thriving. But technically, by the letter of the bylaws, it qualifies as temporary and thus doesn't require approval. Karen's eye twitched harder. Second, regarding aesthetic guidelines. I pulled out more pages. Those same guidelines state that landscaping and outdoor features should enhance the natural beauty of the property and contribute to the community's overall appeal. My bird sanctuary does exactly that. It's professionally constructed, visually appealing, and literally enhances nature. You can't get more naturally beautiful than actual birds living in a well-maintained habitat. Several residents have specifically told me it's the most interesting feature in the neighborhood. A few people nodded. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand. "It's lovely. My grandchildren talk about it constantly." Third, about the noise. I looked directly at Karen. Our community allows dogs, which bark at all hours. We allow children who scream while playing. We allow lawn equipment every Saturday morning starting at 7 a.m., which is apparently fine. We allow Bob's Harley, which he revs in his driveway every Sunday at 6:45 a.m. Bob looked uncomfortable, but didn't deny it. My peacocks call out occasionally, usually at dawn, dusk, and when they're feeling particularly majestic. Yes, they're loud. So is suburban living. The difference is my birds are actually beautiful and serve a conservation purpose. I pulled out my phone and showed photos, passing it around the room. Kids pointing excitedly at Gerald with pure joy on their faces. Elderly residents sitting on their porches peacefully watching the aviary. People taking selfies with the peacocks in the background. Even a few couples who'd apparently started including the sanctuary in their evening walks as a romantic stop. "Finally," I said, "I'd like to point out that several residents have expressed genuine appreciation for the sanctuary. Mrs. Henderson brings her grandchildren daily for educational visits. Phil has started a morning routine specifically to watch the birds with his coffee. The Johnsons' children are learning about different species and ecosystems. I've had requests from the local elementary school about doing field trips. This isn't a nuisance, it's become a community feature." I paused, looked around the room, then focused back on Karen. This isn't about property values or community standards or noise. This is about you not liking that I didn't back down when you made an unreasonable demand about a simple bird feeder. You escalated. I responded, "This is personal, and everyone in this room knows it." The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a feather drop, a finch feather specifically. Karen's face had progressed beyond red into some new color that possibly existed only in the ultraviolet spectrum, detectable only by birds and certain insects. "All those in favor of requiring removal," she said through teeth so clenched I worried about her dental work. "Raise your hand." 5 hands went up. Karen, Deborah, and 3 of their friends who clearly valued their alliance with the HOA President over their own judgment. "All opposed?" 15 hands shot up immediately. Some people raised both hands for emphasis. "Abstaining?" The rest, about 10 people who either didn't care or were conflict-averse enough to avoid committing. Karen looked like she'd been slapped with a fish, a large fish, possibly a swordfish. "The vote, this isn't democratic," I offered helpfully. "Yeah, it is. That's literally how HOA votes work. You called the meeting, we voted according to proper procedure, and the sanctuary stays. Unless you'd like to argue that democracy isn't a valid foundation for community decisions, in which case I have some concerns about your overall philosophy." She gathered her materials with shaking hands, her 73 slides suddenly meaningless, her color-coded handouts just expensive trash. She shoved everything into her bag and left without another word, walking with the rigid posture of someone trying desperately not to run. The meeting dissolved into conversation, and, surprisingly, several neighbors coming up to tell me they thought the whole thing was hilarious and that Karen had needed to be taken down a peg for years. Apparently, she'd been terrorizing the neighborhood with petty complaints long before I arrived. I'd just been the first person to fight back creatively. Phil clapped me on the shoulder. "You absolute madman. You actually won. You beat Karen. With birds. Nobody beats Karen." "Not quite yet," I said, watching her car peel out of the parking lot. "She's not done." "What do you mean?" "People like Karen don't give up, Phil. They regroup, reassess, and come back with escalation tactics that would make military strategists weep with envy. This isn't over." I was right. Friday morning, I woke to find a note taped to my mailbox in Karen's distinctive aggressive handwriting. "Just because they voted doesn't mean this is over. There are other ways to handle this. K." It read less like a note and more like a threat from a Bond villain. That weekend, Karen began her counteroffensive with the determination of someone who'd clearly spent all night researching municipal codes and revenge strategies. Saturday morning, she called animal control, claiming the birds were being kept in inhumane conditions and that I was running an unlicensed animal facility. The inspector arrived at noon, a tired-looking man named Martin, who clearly hadn't signed up for suburban bird drama when he chose this career. He walked around the aviary slowly, taking notes, examining the structure, watching the birds. Gerald displayed his tail feathers for him. The doves cooed pleasantly. The finches chirped their approval. After 20 minutes, Martin turned to me. "Sir, this is nicer than my apartment. The birds have more space than I do. They've got running water, shelter, multiple food sources, enrichment activities. This is actually a really well-designed habitat." "Thank you. Who called this in?" "The HOA President." He sighed deeply. "Let me guess. She lives in that house?" He pointed at Karen's place. "How'd you know?" "The one with the person staring at us through binoculars from the window." We both waved. Karen's curtains snapped shut. I'll file a report saying everything's in compliance, Martin said. Excellent work, honestly. If you ever want to volunteer at the Wildlife Center, we could use someone with your setup skills. Sunday, Karen contacted the township zoning office about potential violations. She filed a complaint claiming I was operating a commercial animal facility without proper permits. The zoning officer, a patient woman named Patricia, came out Monday morning with a clipboard and a look that suggested she'd seen this kind of neighbor dispute 1,000 times. She inspected the property, took measurements, consulted her maps and codes, then sat down at my kitchen table for coffee. Your property is technically grandfathered, under township regulations that predated your HOA, Patricia explained. When this development was built, they adopted stricter rules than the township requires, but those only apply to new construction and major renovations. Your aviary, while substantial, doesn't trigger those requirements. You're actually operating under older, more lenient rules. So I'm fine? You're fine. Keep the birds, enjoy them. Tell your HOA president that not everything falls under her jurisdiction. She paused. Also, those peacocks are gorgeous. Do they really scream like people say? Want to hear? Absolutely. I whistled. Gerald, never one to miss an audience, let out his signature call. Ah! Patricia jumped, then laughed. Oh my God, that's incredible. That's the most offensive sound I've ever heard. I love him. Tuesday brought a visit from a county official investigating Karen's claim that I was running an unlicensed zoo. This inspector, a young guy named Marcus, took one look at the aviary, checked some boxes on a form, and said, "Ma'am, sorry, sir. You know this is just birds, right? Like regular birds?" She called it a zoo? She specifically used the word menagerie. She said you were displaying exotic animals for profit. I'm not charging admission. That's what I figured. This is just birds in your yard. This isn't a zoo. This is barely a large pet situation. You're fine. Each failed attempt made Karen more desperate and made my aviary more famous. Local news picked up the story after someone tipped them off. A reporter named Jessica showed up Wednesday afternoon with a cameraman. We heard about the HOA dispute over a bird sanctuary, she said, microphone ready. Can you tell us what happened? I gave her the full story. She ate it up. The segment aired Thursday evening. Local man builds bird paradise in HOA dispute. They interviewed me, showed beautiful shots of the aviary with birds flying around, got footage of Gerald, screaming, and even interviewed neighbors. Mrs. Henderson gushed about the educational value. Phil called it the greatest thing that's ever happened to this street. They tried to interview Karen, but she slammed her door in their faces. The story went viral. A birding blog featured it with the headline, "Malicious Compliance Meets Bird Conservation." Someone made a TikTok that got 400,000 likes. A local radio show discussed it for 20 minutes. People started driving by just to see the Peacock House, turning our quiet cul-de-sac into a minor tourist attraction. The attention brought unexpected benefits. The elementary school officially requested permission for field trips. A wildlife photographer asked to use the aviary as a subject for a conservation photography series. A local university's biology department inquired about using it for student observations. Suddenly, my Spite project had become a legitimate educational resource. Karen tried one final gambit. She called the mayor's office, the town council, the police non-emergency line, and apparently even her state representative. Each call resulted in the same response. "Ma'am, there's nothing illegal happening. The birds are properly cared for. This is a private property issue." The town council, likely exhausted by her constant calls, issued an official statement at their next public meeting, which Karen attended, sitting in the front row with her arms crossed. Councilman Davies read it aloud. Regarding the bird sanctuary at 42 Maple Grove Lane, the council finds no legal or safety concerns. The structure appears to be a charming addition to the community and demonstrates an admirable commitment to wildlife conservation. No further action required. Karen left that meeting looking like she'd aged 10 years. 2 months after this whole saga began, I was sitting on my porch with my morning coffee, watching Gerald and his companions strut around like they owned the place, which, in a sense, they did. When Karen appeared on the sidewalk, she looked different, tired, defeated. Her visor was gone. Her signature white capris had been replaced by regular jeans. She looked like she'd finally accepted that she couldn't legislate, regulate, intimidate, or paperwork the birds into non-existence. "They're loud," she said quietly, stopping at the edge of my property. "Yes. And they're actually kind of beautiful." I nearly dropped my coffee. "What?" She sighed deeply, the sound of someone releasing months of tension. "I watched a nature documentary last night about peacocks. Did you know they're originally from India? That their feathers have been symbols of nobility for thousands of years?" "I did know that, actually." "Gerald, that's the big one's name?" "Yes." "Gerald displayed his feathers yesterday afternoon. I was watching from my window. It was actually stunning. I've been so angry I forgot to actually look at what you'd built." We sat in silence for a moment. A dove cooed. A finch chirped. Gerald, sensing an audience, began his morning call. "Ah!" Karen flinched, but didn't run. Progress. "You did this to humiliate me," she said finally. "No, Karen. I did this because you tried to make me take down a bird feeder. You escalated over something meaningless because you wanted to flex your authority. You needed to prove you were in charge. I just reflected that energy back at you, with peacocks and doves and finches and a complete disregard for your arbitrary rules. I'm the HOA President. You're a neighbor, that's all. Same as the rest of us. The title doesn't make you special, and it definitely doesn't make you right. It just makes you responsible for community issues, not for controlling every aspect of everyone's lives." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the birds. "People are saying I should resign." "Are you going to?" "I don't know. Maybe. I'm tired, Kevin. I'm so tired of fighting about everything. When did I become the person everyone hates?" "Probably around the time you started measuring grass heights with rulers and threatening people over bird feeders." She almost smiled. Almost. "Fair point." She turned and walked back toward her house, slower than usual, less rigid. We haven't had a real conversation since, but something shifted that day. The constant complaints stopped. The threatening notes disappeared. The emergency meetings ceased. The aviary is still there. Randy comes by occasionally to check on his masterpiece and take more photos for his portfolio. The birds are thriving. Gerald still screams at dawn like he's announcing the apocalypse. Herbert has started a collection of shiny objects he steals from visitors, and Reginald seems to enjoy posing for Instagram photos. Last week, I added a hammock next to the aviary and a small pergola with climbing plants. It's become my favorite spot to read. The birds seem to enjoy having me nearby, and I've discovered that peacock screaming is actually quite soothing once you get used to it, like very aggressive meditation or exposure therapy for your eardrums. The elementary school had their first field trip 2 weeks ago. 25 second graders showed up with clipboards and drew pictures of the birds. Gerald performed for them like he was Broadway bound. One kid asked if peacocks were dinosaur chickens, which is now my favorite description of them. Mrs. Henderson brings her grandchildren every Tuesday and Friday. They've named all the finches. Phil has started bringing his own birds. He bought 2 parakeets specifically so they could visit the sanctuary and socialize. Karen's house has been remarkably quiet. Her perfectly geometric hedges remain perfect, maintained with slightly less aggression. Her doormat probably still says something about removing shoes, but I haven't been close enough to check. She doesn't come over anymore, doesn't leave notes, doesn't call emergency meetings. Sometimes I see her sitting on her porch in the evening, and I wonder if she's listening to the birds. Last Tuesday, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a note in Karen's handwriting, less aggressive than before. The Johnsons asked about getting chickens. I told them I'd check the bylaws. Turns out we don't technically prohibit chickens either. Thought you'd appreciate the irony. K. Progress. This whole experience taught me something important about suburban life. Most fights aren't about what they're about. They're about control, pride, and the desperate human need to feel important. Karen didn't actually care about my bird feeder. She cared about being obeyed. And when someone finally pushed back, when someone built a monument to her pettiness that she couldn't tear down, she had to face the reality that her authority was always performative. The birds don't care about any of that, obviously. They just eat, sing, strut, and occasionally scream at the sunrise. Gerald's current project is trying to attract a female peacock from somewhere. I haven't told him they're not common in suburban Pennsylvania. Let him dream. Yesterday, a family drove from 40 minutes away just to see the famous peacock house. They took pictures. Their kids pressed their faces against the mesh. One of them asked if I give tours. Sure, I said. Free admission, educational purpose, community resource. Is it true you built this because your HOA president tried to ban your bird feeder? Yes. That's amazing. You're a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who refused to let someone take away something small that brought me joy. And somehow, in the process of fighting back, I created something that brings joy to dozens of people. The kids who visit, the neighbors who walk by, the biology students who come to observe, even Karen, possibly, on quiet evenings when Gerald's not screaming. Randy called yesterday to tell me someone else in the county saw his website and wants a similar aviary. You've started a trend, he said. Spite aviaries. It's going to be a whole thing. Beautiful. You're a visionary. Gerald just screamed again. It's 6:15 a.m. The neighborhood is awake. Mrs. Henderson is already walking over with her grandchildren. Phil's on his porch with his coffee, giving me a thumbs up. The Johnsons' kids are watching from their window, and Karen's curtains just twitched. But this time I think I saw her smile. Maybe. Perfect.